And so we have David here to talk as a storyteller on what he sees of the coast and what he would like to see. So if everyone could give it up for David.
Yep. Thanks, Bruce. That's working? Yeah, I stand here rather oddly as a newspaper man. Yes, they do exist. And there's two of the weekly newspapers that you can get for free on the Central Coast. 180,000 of these produced every month. They're weekly. There is another masthead called the Peninsula News. You can have a look in today's paper. We've got ScoMo on the front with a wombat, with a pithy headline, "From Combat to Wombat." Our editor kind of likes a pithy headline. But really what it's about is storytelling, and I wanted to talk about the geography of the Central Coast, 340,000 people or thereabouts. I think it's fair to say that it hasn't always considered itself a region, although over the last 10 years or so, it has, 15 years perhaps, it has sort of matured into a thought that it is a region in its own right. I, like other speakers, Matt, here I'm a supporter of the amalgamation for the very reason that a amalgamated voice, a singular voice in Macquarie Street and down in Canberra and in the other places where the Central Coast should be pitching, a singular strong voice is a good voice. But one of the things that we always have suffered, in my opinion, is this sort of village and suburb mentality. Because we're so beautiful and we have villages, beautiful villages all over the region, very often we don't get to meet. We don't have a central place like Newcastle or Wollongong or even Armidale. So we have that grand challenge, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage. Have I done something with that? Oh, there it is. So the only other way to create a conversation is to do things like this. Perhaps we can try and make Gosford into a CBD of sorts. The other thing is to just embrace the mediums that are in front of us, and that is the storytelling, a local news organisation. So I set up a digital version of these newspapers. These newspapers have, in fact, or in one form or another, the publisher's been around for 20 years. Started in the Peninsula News. I've known the publisher for many years. Some years ago I knew he was going to retire, so we set out to try and find a new investor. I went and pitched it to funds, and of course it's too small for a fund. So very fortunately, a friend of mine who is was a fund manager said, "You know what, bugger it, we'll buy it." So he's bought it privately with his wife, recapitalised the newspapers, and you may have seen the changes that have happened in the last year. So we've almost tripled our distribution. We have a great deal of people that read the paper, at least in a small form. We have 90,000 online, these are regular online users. That's just on the one platform, on the website and all the social. We're one of the few organisations that's been employing journalists recently. So we've employed 3 journalists in the last 2 months, and we're just about to put on another one, which is kind of odd. But I think it's testament to the fact that we, all of you, want to hear your local stories. We publish 100 stories a week, so 400 stories go up a month, produced by these journalists and various people who send us things too. So a part of my appeal here is really about generating those stories that will in turn generate the very important part of telling those stories within us, and then when we go out into the world that we tell it. We've been publishing Matt's story, or a little video story that we did a couple of weeks ago to promote this event, and that's been very popular. As are business stories generally on the Central Coast. My analytics show that our business stories are amongst, and our environmental stories, are amongst the most popular stories that we read about here. We try to keep those stories local, so we don't cover generally national or state stories, unless the Premier or the Prime Minister's up. Quite obviously, we talk about those things. So we do have a series of digital platforms, video, audio, mobile streaming, and so on. We have this is one of our young journalists. We have a weekly news, 10-minute news called 5 at 5, which will be published at 5 o'clock this afternoon, that wraps up the top stories each week. So we're trying to create a new series of platforms and discussion points for people to be part of. That is our mission. We've built a new community media hub in Gosford, in Man Street, in the Freemasons building on level 1, and our journalists are on level 2. So what I'm here to say is I'm inviting you in. There's a studio there, both audio and video. If you want to tell your stories, feel free to contact us, come in, shoot, podcast, stream, or whatever may be, your stories. So this is a bit of a pitch to you to start that. I'm going to talk about a few other things about the region and its deficiencies, and the way that, in fact, I think that we're turning the whole thing around. And in my mind, it is very clear that the Central Coast now is on an upward trend, after many years of not quite knowing what it was or what it wanted to be. I think that the COVID situation, in fact, is giving the Central Coast a much-needed jolt. And there are a lot of companies that have suffered, but we've been reporting on stories of companies that have actually, and employees who are actually making a great deal out of this current situation. For example, there are so many more people telecommuting, as it used to be called, than ever before. The stress on our rail and road by data has reduced massively. People are moving up here and wanting to stay here. Now, I think within a year or two, we will see a huge amount of dividend from those people being on the coast, telling their stories, bumping into each other, and creating new enterprises. I think that's massively important. I mean, it's a stimulating thing to listen to people that do things out in the world, like Matt has talked about today. These things, as we all know, generate their own interest. I can do that too, or a version of it. So I think, in a way, my pitch is that I think our time has come. The cautionary notes are that I believe we need to do what you're doing here, Bruce, and the group. I think our clear identity is that we are a beautiful place and we all love the place to bits because of its environment, because of some very clever decisions, for example, the Coastlands, the beautiful environment, the beautiful beaches, the marine environment and so on. I think that is part of our identity. And when the council did their survey a year or so ago to do with their community strategic plan, that came across very clearly. I think that one thing we do lack a research capacity, as in I believe we lack our own university or something similar to that, because we need capacity, we need brain capacity to maintain the engine of thinking onwards, past election cycles. Now, there's been a little bit of movement at the station where there's a medical research institute that started up at Gosford Hospital, which is a good thing. But it's run by the University of Newcastle. I love Newcastle, but it ain't our university. So I've always said I think time has come for us to have our own research and teaching institution. And I believe it will. All smart cities in the world all have their own research and education facilities. So now we're in a bit of an interesting space too at the moment, because there's this wonderful battle going on between the federal government and Google and Facebook, of which I'm a great fan of. The battle needs to be had. These massively successful companies have landed right in the middle of the Australian landscape, and as you may know, in the last 12 months, 120 mastheads around Australia have closed. 120 mastheads around have closed. Some of our great big companies, the ex-Fairfax and News, have closed down, amongst others, have closed down so many mastheads, have closed down the conversations close down the conversations that communities are having around the country. So it's a hugely, bigger news organisations assert that they have sucked the life out of revenue for newspapers and news organisations. I think part of that is true. I used to be a Google partner in my previous business, one of the first in the country, and it is an extremely impressive organisation in making money, and it's an extremely poor organisation in distributing money to where it gets money from. And that's why its profits are so wonderful, and its share price is times 15 where it launched at $100. So these are big, important organisations, and I'm so very glad that the federal government has taken the conversation up to Google and to Facebook and said you need to negotiate with the news organisations about how this very significant content is delivered to their communities. I hope we don't get an over-regulated situation, because I don't think that would particularly work well. But I do think an overview of that would be really great. It would help us become sustainable. It would spread your stories around in our community in particular, but it would also supplement the sustainability of an organisation such as us. So I'm very pleased about the current environment. As I said, we've strangely been growing very rapidly, and I think that we're going to grow the organisation considerably more. We have ambitions outside the region, but we want to get it absolutely right here before we do. So my appeal, I've taken a few of the snaps already out there, is to please tell us your stories. If you're in business or if you have a narrative that you think is important, that tells the narrative of growth on the Central Coast, on challenge and of change and success, we're here for you. And you'll very highly likely have it published. There's a grand capacity. It might not be in the paper, but it certainly will be online. So there's my short, sharp, post-lunch, little bit of a sugar hit kind of talk. One more pitch is, you may remember or may not remember, I was actually an independent candidate for the federal seat of Robertson in the last election, and it was a wonderful learning experience, as you may. And one of my supporters in that campaign, a humorous supporter, was H.G. Nelson, a dear friend of mine, and we had a couple of comedy shows before this whole COVID thing started, and we were packing the places out, and we'd sold most of our tickets, and the bloody COVID came, and many people had to be refunded. So building capacity, as I'm saying, building capacity in a good sense and natured way can be done in any way. A discount to everybody here to a show, which will no doubt come back in the new year to our show, which was called the Kincumber Roundabout Think Tank. It was very ambitious. It was an extension of the even greater Sydney Planning Commission. So we thought we might call it, now that the Kincumber Roundabout is finished and fantastic, we thought we might call it the even greater than Sydney Planning Commission for the Central Coast. So there we go. Any questions? Please feel free to ask.